Founders Forum is a global community of the top tech founders, corporate CEOs, and senior investors. While our community is not able to gather, we're pleased to be bringing you our new event series, FF Live. So Founders Forum Live, as you all know, because you're all here, we bring together amazing speakers and a great community as we have today. So in a second, I'm going to hand over to our moderator. A recording of the session will also be posted along with all other FF Live sessions on the Founders Forum YouTube page once this is over. So please head over there and subscribe and share with friends. So right now, I'm pleased to hand you over to our guest, today's guest moderator, Emiko, who is the online commodities editor at the illustrious Financial Times. She covers food and ag tech and agriculture commodities. She's been a member of the FT Natural Resources team since 2011. She started in at the FT in Tokyo as a business reporter and has covered markets, media, the city diary, as well as editing corporate news. So Emiko will introduce our panelists. Over to you, Emiko, and thank you all for joining.
Thanks, Brent. Great to be here. I'd like to introduce the leading lights of alternative proteins, who are panelists today. We've got Uma Valetti, who's the founder of Memphis Meats, which is a cell-based meat company. And we've got David Lee, who's the CFO of Impossible Foods. Welcome, gentlemen. Great to have you here and really excited for this session. I was just wondering if we could start with just a recap of, where you are, who you are, where you are. I know a lot of people in the audience would be interested in, who are interested in food tech would know, but there are some, who'd like to catch up. So maybe start with Uma, if you could just tell us the Memphis Meat story.
Yeah, thanks, Emiko. It's great to be back at the Founders Forum. I was there last year in June in London and sorely miss not being there, but I'm glad you're doing this session. And Emiko, thanks for your reporting in the space and really appreciate how you covered the news that was only verified when you were breaking the news about fundraising. So thanks for that integrity. Want a big shout out for you as well. Yeah, Memphis Meats, it's a company that's born out of an idea from work I'd been doing in cardiology. I'm a cardiologist by training. I trained at the Mayo Clinic and very early on working on stem cells and injecting them into patients' hearts to regrow heart muscle. And I really got intrigued with the idea of could we grow food from cells? And that's what led to starting to looking at various species of animals that we as humans have eaten historically, and started looking at some high quality cells and trying to see if we can grow the cells directly into the meat we love. And that was the origin of the idea for Memphis Meats. We are based in Berkeley, about 40 miles north of where David is based, down in San Mateo, Palo Alto area. So yeah, we're in California. We are about 65 people at this point and growing.
Great. And just, you don't have any product out on the shelves, unlike Impossible, but just, yeah. Can you give us a timeline? Or I think when we spoke last, you were saying maybe a year and a half, 2 years?
Yeah, absolutely. This field is a new field. Just think about it. Even 4.5 years ago, this whole field was in the realm of science fiction, and we were doing some academic work in basic science or university labs. And moving a field like that from science fiction to reality does take a lot of lifting. And we are not on the market yet, but we hope to be in the market soon. We're working with the regulatory systems in the US and outside the US. But the idea is to be able to introduce consumers to real meat without a compromise. And we've started showing a number of the products. We've done beef, we've done chicken, we've done duck. And we have a few other products that we have in mind to start showing to the public. We'd love to be able to start getting the production up to a place where we can start producing and putting on the market. And that's the phase that we're in right now. The recent Series B that was announced was to build a pilot plant so that we can start getting product out to the market.
Okay. David, when did you join Pat Brown in his endeavor? And I think there was some exciting announcements a few days ago in terms of tie-ups.
Yeah, thank you. And by the way, thanks again to everyone for having us together. I'm a good friend of Uma's, and it's always fun to talk about the future of food. with you, Emiko. Well, I joined Pat Brown about 4 years into the journey. Remember, Pat Brown, our founder, started the company in 2011 with a great pedigree in science, but he founded it because he felt like the greatest persistent problem we face is that meat eaters, of which I am one, we meat eaters are voraciously consuming the world's resources and not doing a great job about taking care of our health. So after 4 years of very intense research and development, Pat felt he was ready to take the mission and the science and hope that we could turn it into a consumer movement. You know, our bet has always been give the meat eater the ability to change the world, give the meat eater a better and better product and count on them to create the consumer movement. So that started in 2015. I joined the company then, along with a few members. I joined as the chief operating officer and the CFO with the remit to try to help Pat take mission and science and turn it into a business. And it's been an incredible, fantastic ride over the last 5 years. You know, I remember having one customer, a celebrity chef named David Chang at Momofuku in New York. I remember landing him as a customer, having him immediately post before I could take the phone out of his hands.
And he hated vegans at one point, right?
Yeah, he was known to have been picketed by PETA. He had created one of the fastest selling burgers at Shake Shack. He has a very high bar if you know or see him on Ugly Delicious on Netflix with regard to food. And that's what we were looking for, you know, someone who stood for craveable, delicious meat for meat eaters. And to call upon the recent news, you fast forward to today, so that was in 2016, and you know, we've launched our second platform, Impossible Sausage. We're at 20,000 locations, you know, 15,000 Starbucks, and we're a great Impossible Crust sandwich at Burger King. And our retail business is really, in the last, call it 2 to 3 months, become a very big nationwide business. So for us, it's been exhilarating. And, you know, to the point that you're raising with Uma and me, it feels like just in a flash, a blink, a company with superior technology can have a product and be nationwide. And Uma is well on his way as well. He's just taking a different approach to solving the same problem.
I find this, the concept of using technology to create a new food is it's just so exciting. But you know, there must have been a lot of, and still is a lot of challenges. I was just wondering, maybe, you know, if you can reflect on, or maybe give us the audience a bit of color around me on, you know, some of the headwinds and challenges that, you know, you faced, and maybe you've overcome them, maybe you're still grappling with them.
Yeah, maybe I start, and then Uma, I'd love to get your view as well. Food is an emotional product. I had come from a background in helping large consumer companies go through transformation. So, you know, Del Monte Foods and the Best Buy turnaround, and Zynga, a technology company. And I think the key with food is to recognize that it's almost as if we identify with what we eat emotionally and viscerally. And so that means that you have to debunk a lot of emotion around food that a lot of meat eaters have inherent. You know, the fact is, food has always been driven by technology. You know, a piece of bread, I like to say, apple pie here in the US probably has more technology, engineering, R&D in it than you can possibly imagine. But for us, the way to get around all that is to be more transparent than almost any other food company on why we're bypassing the animal, how we make the product, you know, where the ingredients come from, how we avoid a lot of the compromises that you're seeing being reported today with slaughterhouses and processing of meat and global pandemics, because the consumer will eventually be discerning enough to figure out what is the noise and what is the signal. That's been our bet, and so far it's been working okay.
Okay. But any challenges along the way that you thought, you know, will they really get it? Any doubts?
Oh my gosh, I think every entrepreneur on this call, every VC investor, the litany of late nights, doubts and concerns. It used to be 5 years ago, I was worried, you know, will the technology work? Will it taste good? Will it have no cholesterol? You know, do I know how to make the product at superior unit economics? Will the consumer accept it? Those aren't the concerns today we have. You know, we feel that there's some validation of those things. Now our concerns about, can we speed up our capacity and supply chain fast enough for this demand? I mean, this demand, you know, we're going to grow our retail business 50x this year, and our grocery business will have grown since March alone 30x. So the demand from the meat eater in our case requires us to really worry about execution now, whereas before I think it was around technology and business model.
I really felt that when I was speaking to you last year. I think when there were lots
the
of
stress
reports.
was apparent.
Came down the phone, when the press was sort of onto you about, you know, not having enough Impossible Burger to sell. But Umo, what about you?
Yeah, absolutely. There have been challenges along the way, and significantly more challenges 4 years ago when we started to where we are now, and we still have challenges ahead. But I mean, the lesson here for all of us entrepreneurs on the call is there is enormous amount of skepticism, and you're actually starting off a completely new concept in the industry. And especially when it's so deeply rooted in technology, and also the need for a number of people to understand the why behind it. And thankfully, the why behind the global reasons of innovation for meat and food have been more and more evident with increasing demand and increasing stresses on the environment, as well as now the awareness of the need for health and how food gets to the table. So we start off on that background. So it has helped us, but the hurdles initially were really to let people recognize that here's an opportunity to let humanity preserve the choice that they've always had for thousands of years, which is meat from animals, but in a very distinct way, not requiring to raise animals. In which case, they're like the types of cells we can get and the diversity of cells and the breeds of animal cells we can start looking at and start, you know, producing meat or seafood or poultry out of them. Just the possibilities become limitless. But the biggest challenge there was recognizing, you know, that the field had to understand how this comes to, and how it's economically more advantageous to do it, so, and how the science works. So I'd say letting people recognize the first principles approach to this was really critical for our success. There was lots of headwind.
When did you think that the turning point was? Because I think people started talking about it when companies like Tyson and Cargill, you know, the big meat producers actually started saying, oh, well, we need to put money into this. But I don't, maybe you felt it before then, but.
Absolutely, we felt it well before that, but Nick and I co-founded the company, and in the early days, it was all like surviving from lifelines to lifelines. You would just get a group of people saying, yes, this would make sense, but explain the first principles, and we do so and say, look, all food is made of cells. Cells are the building blocks of everything we eat. If an animal is raised to make meat, we are eating maybe a 40% of that animal, and the skin, bones, hair, and other things are not actually being consumed. Whereas in this scenario, we're just going to grow the food we want and the cells we want, and it's so much more economical to feed and scale. But the fundamental change really happened as we started showing to the world what the products look like, how people come and taste it, and that really changed everything. And I'd say it's like a light bulb goes off when people come and see a plate of meat in front of them and say, this is meat. This is not a meat alternative. This is the beef that they've been eating, and this is the chicken. This is duck. That was a pretty important moment. And the part that we did really, I'm very proud of our team, is we decided not to be in the stealth mode. We're like, this is going to be new. People have to discuss this and get used to the concept. So we decided to start showing products right from day one. So in fact, when we were, you know, a team of 4 people, we invited the Wall Street Journal to come and start talking to us. And when we were a team of, I'd say 7 or 8, we invited them to come and actually do a tasting with their independent reporters. I think that really kicked off an interest that just, I'd say, became viral. And subsequent to that, when Tyson joined us and Cargill joined us, and we started building a big tent of investors, which specifically means our investors, just like our team members, include, you know, hardcore vegans to hardcore meat eaters to people who care deeply about impact on environment, on health and climate. And just bringing all these people together just made a huge, huge difference as like this broad-based appeal to this concept, although no product has been on the market yet.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Just fast forward, and I think David, well, both of you really touched on it. The current pandemic is, highlighting all sorts of issues around the way meat is reared and produced, and just wondering, David, what your takeaway is, personally, and also maybe for your business as well.
Well, I think this pandemic and the pandemics that will come, as this is not a single event, to be clear. We just yesterday, I think it was reported that there was a new identified candidate for a global pandemic from a swine flu pathogen. So this pandemic and the ones that come are fundamentally changing how meat eaters consume and shop for meat in a way that I don't think is temporary. It's fundamentally changing as we are often now sheltering at home and deeply thinking about all of our priorities in the face of trauma. People are thinking about what they're putting in themselves when they make a choice. Why, as Uma said, why is a company creating something new? What is the impact? And there's increasing awareness that, frankly, every global pandemic has largely occurred because of our relationship with animals. That's just a fact. And you read the news of the day, and meat eaters are reading the news of the day, seeing that slaughterhouses and transportation of animals and processing of animals has created conditions that are frankly challenging, not just for the production of food, but challenging for the people on the front lines. So for example, we have seen a massive change amongst our restaurant food service partners. They're innovating. The FDA allowed them to sell raw food direct, picked up or shipped to the consumer for the first time in March. So we helped enable that. People can buy the Impossible Burger that way. We created our own direct-to-consumer business, buy.impossiblefoods.com. Anyone in the lower 48 states of the US can be shipped directly a product. And most importantly, we went to where the meat eater is increasingly purchasing through Instacart and other partners, and it's in grocery stores, which we always knew could be the killer app for the Impossible Burger and one day Impossible Sausage from plants, because unlike a lot of meat, you don't see it in a restaurant transform. You can't know that it can be rare or well done or be put in bolognese or a dumpling or a burger. Whereas when you take home the Impossible Burger, we think it's the only plant-based product that becomes bespoke in the hands of one home chef versus another, much like meat does. That's the great appeal of meat. So we're hopeful that we can just keep pace during this difficult time, provide our customers, our employees, innovation to match theirs. But I don't see this as being a storm that ends. This is going to change behavior for the long haul.
Yeah, no, there's a lot going on in that pathogen area. Uma?
Yes, well, I think, first of all, I'm really grateful for the farmers and the food producers that have still kept food on the table, even through this pandemic. So I think there are some real lessons that have come out from this, that we, for the first time, I think, recognized how vulnerable our food system is. And it exposed some of the shortfalls in it. And that we're not immune if we have a long-lasting crisis like we are going through right now, that food shortages will be real. Food stocking and food stockpiling and food safety, food security are important issues for countries and regions to keep in mind. And as we start approaching the levels of population we have and the number of animals that have to be raised to keep the demand for meat up, it is clearly an untenable equation. I think this is just the beginning of how we start shifting the food supply chain. And I'm very optimistic with the number of people that have reached out to us. And I assume, David, you've also seen this, that people are recognizing the importance of having choices, importance of having diversity on the table. And, we could very easily have said, look, if we start thinking about just doubling of the meat demand we're expecting in the next 25, 30 years, and we don't have to add any more animals to the planet, but start changing that into plant-based or cell-based, the opportunity of reversing the tide of the relationship between zoonotic diseases and pandemics, it's a pretty big one we should be able to take and not be reactive in the future. So we've seen a sea of interest in people wanting to find out more about cell-based meat, and the fact that it offers the choice of not giving up what we love. So I think it's opened our eyes. It's real. And David, it goes without saying, Emiko, I think you wrote in your Financial Times article that the demand for plant-based has increased by 200%.
Yeah.
And we just can't wait to be on the market for people to have the choice.
Mm.
Yeah, I would add to that and say, it really is a misconception that big food will eventually encroach upon the young upstarts market. The reality is, even from my days, running food at Del Monte, I can tell you, big food companies have long been trying to offer better meat. And there are numerous brands that reflect the attempts. So the issue is not that the big food giants are waking up. It's rather that there hasn't been great technology to make the meat eater say, wow, that hits the spot. That hits my need for craveability and makes me feel less guilty about the fact that I've always been in denial about where my stuff comes from and what it does to my health and the environment. And so companies like Uma's and companies like Impossible Foods, it's going after like a $1.7 trillion market, not a fringe niche market that big meat will enter. And I think that's an important framing for the industry. And I think consumers are starting to demonstrate that.
Yeah, no, so it does, the alternative protein does sort of neatly fit into the whole climate change and sustainability angles that I think in this Founders Forum sessions are trying to address. But it's competition. You mentioned that diversity, but actually, are you competing against each other in the plant-based market space? How does Impossible stay on top? David, I know you're going to say, well, we have the best.
Well, you've heard me say it like 5 million times. But so has Uma. I mean, so has Uma. And I will say beyond the soundbite, which I believe is true, which I really believe, and we entirely just focus on the meat that comes from animals because it's the market today.
But are you really finding people time and time again meat eaters coming back?
9 out of 10 of our consumers describe themselves as hardcore meat eaters. 9 out of 10 consumers, and they have high repeat because we meat eaters, we define every meal, breakfast, lunch, and dinner by the kind of meat that we crave. It's such an enormous everyday part of people's lives, the idea that there's a zero-sum game in such a large market that, one company will rule them all. It doesn't actually reflect the reality of consumer behavior and competition today. When you as a meat eater go into a grocery store or a restaurant, do you exclusively know the source, the company, the name from which all the different kinds of meat come? Absolutely not. You go in thinking, I want something delicious that's better. And we believe that companies like Memphis Meats and many others with us all of us are required to go after a common mission. Now, that's not to say, could there be when meat from an animal is so clearly not the best choice, and there are tons of brands with 70, 80% global penetration of the previous meat market from animals, all driven by great technologies and great brands. Maybe that day will come where there'll be a bit of competition on the margin. We are so far away from that day. I can't wait for that day, is my view. And Uma, I'd love to get yours because I know we've talked about this privately as well.
Well, I mean, but when is, no, I can't wait for cell-based meat to come, onto the market. But are you really going to be able to shake the lab-grown moniker, off? And I know you've told me that young people, are quite willing to try it, but what about the older generation? What do you think is going to happen?
Yeah, that used to be a topic that came up like maybe every other question in the past, but I don't even think it matters anymore, because when people start seeing what the products look like, what they taste like, and what they stand for and the why behind it, the what was called in the past to where it is right now. I mean, the field went through an evolution of being called in vitro meat to lab-grown meat to clean meat to cell-based meat and cultivated meat. But ultimately, meat is what we're focusing on. This is meat, this is poultry, this is seafood. I think putting products in front of a consumer and having businesses and partners be able to get it onto their shelves or restaurants, it matters a lot because that's what a consumer is looking for. And we've also, fortunately now we can look back over the last 4.5 years and actually have real consumer data and consumer research that's been done by many academics, many nonprofits like the Good Food Institute and New Harvest. And frankly, Financial Times probably also ran a poll at some point. There is broad support across all demographics. Granted, the support is like close to 80+% in the less than 50-year-olds, but even over age 50, the support is about 50 to 67% for people wanting this on the market. And if you think of any new technology that's coming on, the dream for an entrepreneur is to have an early adopter segment of 3 to 5%. We are more than
that's small.
Right? That's the dream for an entrepreneur. But look at the data we are seeing across all demographics. It's like 50 to 80%. So I'm increasingly confident that the thing that this field needs to do is to start letting people come and see, taste, watch, and recognize how it comes to market. And that's what's going to change the game.
Okay.
One quick point, Uma is spot on from the perspective of, a fellow company that may be a little further down the road in launching its products. What we've seen is the core older demographics are desperate to have better meat, and we have a large penetration of them. But future generations, future consumers, the penetration is so much, the awareness, understanding, desire is so much higher. So from an entrepreneur or an investor standpoint, you have the heart of a very large addressable market that's adopting. But you also have a demographic wave of growth coming where future consumers are even more interested fundamentally in the idea of meat that is better for the world and themselves. That's why this wellspring of demand is likely to be met by many companies and many brands because it's growing in momentum and time. I think it's a question of timing, not if now. I think Uma's right. It's a question on how fast will great brands and innovative companies take on a majority of this market, not a question of if.
Well, really interesting stuff. Why don't I open it up to questions from the audience? I'm sure people have got questions they want to ask. And we've also got a poll going, I think, on what people think the future of protein is. Will it be plant-based? Will it be plant-based versus cell-based? And you can vote just now. Apparently this box will disappear quite soon, so if you just want to,
David, you're voting for strongly.
I know, if only we could both check both boxes that there was a both, given our beliefs, but it'll be interesting to see nonetheless.
Okay, so the first question, can we take Nia? Can you give us your full name and your what you do, and read out your question, please?
Yeah, sure. I'm Nia Gupta. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Fork and Good. Also a cell-based / cultivated meat company like Memphis. We're based in Brooklyn and we're starting in pork. So, hey Uma, hey David. I feel like I'm missing conferences because we don't get a chance to actually catch up in person anymore. You're preaching to the choir in terms of the need for this. We're seeing it now with a lack of resilient supply chains and a need for just variety in how we're approaching our food supply is so key. All of that being said, we're still a drop in the ocean. So the entire plant-based market is way under 1% of the total addressable meat market. And David, you were alluding to this. And cell-based, as we mentioned, is a little bit behind that. So I'm curious to just hear your thoughts on what we need as an industry, as meat alternatives over the next 5 years to really level up, to get to that next level of magnitude. And sure, individually in our companies, it's moving faster, it's increasing capacity, it's manufacturing more. But as an industry and an ecosystem, what do we need to to get to the 10x or the 100x?
Who wants to take that? David, you want to start?
Sure. Well, first, I think there's a group of needs that are related to common capabilities. So we talk about supply chain. It's such an easy phrase, you know, having personally endured growing faster than you can supply, working into the R&D itself, the technology itself, the ability to scale production globally faster than the incumbent industry is clearly a prerequisite. No one really believed that 5 years ago. You know, people would say, you're going to be a very cute little brand for people on the East and West Coast of the United States who are interested in environmentalism. And I think we've debunked that. So that is a clear, that's a very strong area of focus. That's why we've designed more and more our work to be able to be dropped in any finished good manufacturing plant globally. But I think on the other bookend, about there need to be more marketers amongst the innovators who are changing the future of food. Food is not like other functional branded products. It is, as I mentioned at the beginning, a uniquely emotional, you know, we define our self-worth on some days by what we choose to eat. And it's a tricky marketing question on how do you leverage that addiction we meat eaters have to meat to the advantage of things that are new. And I think it's underdeveloped. I mean, we found that the way we went to market was entirely different than the traditional food industry. And it's because there's capacity for innovation in marketing as there is in the fundamental product. In terms of what I think really would accelerate things it is the investor entrepreneur ecosystem. It's where great operating companies have enough room in their P&Ls and their cash flow statements to be able to invest in an ecosystem of investors who can focus on future winners, because we are still in an environment where I don't feel like it's a zero-sum game.
Mm.
Now that could change if this movement we're creating is successful, but it's certainly not the case today. You're seeing so many new entrepreneurs flock to this opportunity because they see it from a consumer standpoint, but there aren't a lot of investor and other professional infrastructure to match the level of interest of the entry I see. And I think that can come from market leaders down the road versus from pure investors.
Interesting. Uma?
Yeah, so I think adding to what David said, I completely agree with what David says about this not being a zero-sum game at all, because we are looking at an industry that is increasing in demand continuously. And there's a great underlying need for people wanting to get to better meat. And as we start doing that, you will start seeing brands evolving. And what needs to happen to get to the 10x or 100x is keep making sure that we have realistic timelines in mind and making sure that this industry doesn't stay in the stealth mode, because there's so much work that has to be done in ecosystems across the world. And there's common areas where companies in cell-based field especially can start working together in trying to get consumers to understand the why behind it, that you're preserving choice of people being able to eat real meat, and that you're able to improve the food safety and food security for that region. And also to start working with the regulators in the region to really recognize the value of bringing products to the market and not taking it for granted that we'll always need to get meat from raising and slaughtering billions of animals, because that paradigm has not been changed. And there isn't a way to really get to where we need to go by 2050 if that isn't changed. And I think to get to the true 10x and 100x's, it is going to be a movement that comes together in an ecosystem that doesn't look at this as a zero-sum game. And it looks at it as the best products are ultimately going to win in the marketplace. And that's including taste and consumer acceptance and the price that we can get to. And that requires supply chains being scaled up and us working with industry incumbents, as well as creating the public-private partnerships necessary for the investments required to make this type of change. And it's okay to accept that there's enormous amount of skepticism that people can get to that. But what's not okay is just trying to solve this by ourselves in our own companies. I think that's what is going to get us to the amplification, that there is an absolute platform that all of us can stand on, and there'll be some brands that will become incredibly large, and there'll be some brands that will be niche, but ultimately they do stand on that platform. And that's what's happening right now with Impossible coming out to the market, and they are going to be changing how consumers are going to be thinking about what they were skeptical even 5 years ago. And we've known what happened with the Beyond IPO last year. And there is more of that to come. And that's just the beginning. And so, yeah, I think we need to keep that in mind for the 10 to 100x.
I guess everything has to move in the same direction at the same, you know, and moving that in tandem for a startup is so difficult, isn't it? The money needs to be there, the capacity needs to be there, the product needs to be there. And if one of those things is out of sync, then, you know, then everything sort of doesn't fall apart, but it just doesn't run as smoothly. But the next question comes from Michelle Malima.
Hello, nice to meet you. I'm Michel Mellema and I work for Unilever. And Unilever, as you may know, has bought the Vegetarian Butcher 12 months ago. And I have the honor to run the Science and Technology department in this startup. So you could say I'm a competitor, but it sometimes feels I'm a colleague of yours, considering we have the same purpose in mind. I have a question regarding the current pandemic and the consequences of that. So it can be argued that this is a tipping point for these excellent new sustainable businesses like meat replacers. But what you tend to see sometimes in crisis situations is that society gets into a survival mode, which means that we are desperately going to try and keep up established, maybe less sustainable businesses like the meat industry. So I was wondering what your opinion is on what the balancing act is going to be, the outcome of the balancing act, and will it depend on geography, for instance? Will it be different in US or Europe or emerging countries?
Do you mean the survival mode in terms of food and what they choose?
No, in terms of investments and trying to keep employability. Obviously, if we're going to solve two problems at the same time now, it may not be appreciated by many employees, definitely, and maybe also consumers.
So from a big company standpoint, what do you choose and put your investments in?
Yeah, and also governments. What do you support?
David, what do you think?
I think it's the right question to ask, Michelle. For me, this is going to sound repetitive. For me, the answer is about the future unit economics and the addressable market you serve. So let me explain. So let's just take Impossible Foods as one example. We closed on March 6th a $500 million Series F investment from global funds, sovereign wealth funds, who persistently believe, despite the emerging pandemic, that there is great economic opportunity if your addressable market is the meat industry and your technology can be cheaper than commodity ground meat or regular meat. And so I think the answer is, and yet at the same time, we saw in March such an important source of our revenue, these restaurants and food service providers, because of the shelter in place, be radically impacted and change. So I think the solution has to be now even more challenging. You have to build a company that has a winning consumer demand for it, but you need to have the line of sight to unit economics that allow you to compete on real hard terms per pound, per unit costs at a future level of scale in order to continue to source investment for growth. We've been lucky in that, you know, of the 1.3 billion we've raised, the vast majority of that has been in the last few years based on the data we've seen in market. But I can only imagine how challenging it must be if and Uma's had great success as well, but if you're on the earlier stage of things, it is a difficult question for younger entrepreneurs to attract the amount of capital given the challenges everyone faces. The good news is food safety is a global priority, more so now, not less so, given the current and future global pandemics. So there will continuously be a need for change beyond the survival mode of this current crisis, I believe. You just have to have a higher bar as an entrepreneur in order to meet it.
Uma?
I'd say well said, David, as a CFO, you put that metrics in sight for all of us. And just to add to that, I want to bring back the component of emotional part for food. And Michelle, to answer your question about how do we incumbent. So governments and politicians look at this, I think one part that comes around is around the dinner table. And this is from my own experience in raising funds for Memphis Meats, is the number of times I've heard from a government official or a politician or an industry executive that around their dinner table, their son, their daughter, or their grandchildren are asking for this. They're bringing up the names of these companies, whether it's Impossible or Memphis or, or things they've read or talked about in their school. It's really a conversation that's happening everywhere, and that actually is to our advantage because I've had at least 2 out of 10 investors that have come in to discuss investment with Memphis. Someone in their family is the one that brought up our name, and I think that's an important piece not to ignore for all of us.
That's really interesting. I was moderating a webinar last week, and Nomad Foods, which is a big frozen food company, said they cut down on the number of categories offered to retailers because they thought that they didn't think that consumers would go for that plant-based food. But then after the initial panic, I think people started demanding plant-based food, and so they had to get it into retailers again. And I think to David and Uma's point that consumers actually do recognize and there is demand for this new category out there. And I think sovereign wealth funds and investors are smart enough to know that, is my impression. But next question comes from Chris Ramsey.
Hi there. I'm not sure if you can see or hear me, but thanks a lot. Utterly fascinating. I run Pelican Founders, which looks for early stage companies in this space and in the environmental impact space as well. But I suppose my question here was just to Uma, on the nutrient side of clean meats, how much catching up is there of working out how the kind of a very complex framework of nutrients and within the product, and it ultimately hindering it from becoming completely ubiquitous because of that. I know, for instance, I think it's vitamin K has a particular impact with some of the amino acids in the clean meats that some of the companies we speak to and how they're absorbed. Is that side of it something that's going to hinder growth going forward, or how would you kind of comment there?
Yeah, it's a really great question on nutrition. I think one of the things we've said is because cells are the building blocks for cell-based meat, we are looking to pick the types of cells that will, by themselves, using their own machinery of manufacturing proteins or amino acids, lipids, that selecting the right types of cells and giving them the feed that these cells can really use to incorporate into their cytoplasm, into their organelles, into their matrices is really critical. I mean, this is a deep technical field, and recognizing that we could measure nutrition and look at existing meat and be able to look at the meat that we're producing and say, are we in the same range? Are we better in areas that we actually want to be better? I think that opportunity is enormous for cell-based meat. As with all meat products that are on the shelf, the nutrition of the meat product depends on which part of the animal it's coming from, how it's been processed, how it gets onto the shelf, and therefore the palette to match is pretty large. And when we come to market, we're going to pick product categories that we're clearly superior or equivalent to what's on the shelf. But I think that's going to continue to get better and better. And truly, the opportunity to make meat better is what is the first principle. That's a huge advantage to cell-based meat.
Next question comes from Muriel.
Hi, wonderful panel. I am the editor of Nutrition Investor magazine, and I would like to ask David what he thinks of the packaging challenge, given the sustainable credentials. The packaging challenge coupled with the need for extending shelf life, are you looking to reduce single-use plastic in wrapping? And for Uma, what are you already starting looking into packaging alternatives?
It's a great question. Let me start. We are hard at work on solving this question of packaging. You know, we launched a direct-to-consumer business, as I mentioned, in the last month. And one of the examples is we're using green cell foam for all of our direct-to-consumer shipments because it insulates the product and ensures that the product is safely delivered with the right shelf life, but it's fully compostable. I will tell you candidly, there is a trade-off as a business on making sure your products are as accessible to all with the right cost structure and making sure every aspect fulfills our mission. Because we believe so much change is happening when meat eaters pick something made from plants, in our case, versus the incumbent product on the environmental front. We're careful to consider all aspects of the life cycle of our products. And so packaging is a part of it, but it is only one component of the way we ship our products, make our products, the trade-offs versus meat. But it is an area of opportunity, and it is an area that we're thinking about carefully.
Yeah, and Muriel, I think we're going to follow the best practices. We are not on the market yet, but I'm really heartened to see the amount of thought that's being put into packaging from the very large, delivery services from Amazon, as well as the packaging innovation that's happening in existing meat industry as well. So I'd have to say at this point, we haven't done a lot of direct work on packaging, but we're going to follow that very closely, and how David's going to be working on getting Impossible out as well.
I guess the slightly alarming news is the pandemic, because of the pandemic, the use of plastics has risen quite sharply, but maybe that's another topic. I'm afraid our time is up, and let me just give you the results of the poll. It's very close. There you go, 55% cell-based and 45% plant-based. David, any comments?
Listen, I love being an underdog in any competition.
Hey, I
wish we had both. That would be more pleasing for me to see. But listen, I appreciate this conversation. I think the more conversations we can have, and Uma, it's always a pleasure speaking with you and you, Emiko. So thanks for having us.
We were discussing whether there should be sort of fireworks and battling of swords, crossing of swords, but glad to say that this didn't happen. Great to have you, gentlemen. Very interesting chat, and thank you very much, members of the audience, for sparing your time, and hope you found this interesting as well. So that's goodbye for the Founders Forum. Bye-bye.